Yes, I'm still sick, so ignore the annoyance in my voice. If you enjoy my content, please do hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. And if you have a story to send my way, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so, and all that jazz. And sorry if I sound bad. I used to work at a certain cheap little jewelry store in a decent-sized shopping mall here in my hometown. You can all probably guess the name of the store. I'm not going to put it out there because they didn't have anything to do with what happened, so I don't want to drag their name or anything. It was a pretty mundane job, with the usual challenges, nothing too crazy really. I think the hardest things that I had to do were watch out for teen girls who would try to pocket random earrings. It really wasn't hard to tell when they were going to try and steal something, and if you stood over them, they would usually abandon their plans and just leave. There was one year, though, where things got weird and creepy. It actually involved the mall's Santa Claus, which was a huge attraction for our mall near Christmas time. I've never really liked mall Santas. When I was a little kid, I would always burst into tears when my mom would take me to see them, and as an adult, they just kind of creeped me out. In this specific year, the mall had hired a new Santa because the one that had done the job the previous decade had, sadly, been diagnosed with cancer, and he wasn't able to do the job anymore. The new Santa was, to put it kindly, a bit different. He wasn't quite large enough to fill the role, and he didn't have a jolly look in his eyes. He looked rather cold and distant every time I saw him. The kids didn't seem to mind, and I think the parents were just happy to keep the tradition going, so it was what it was. One night, I was working the closing shift at my store, just stocking, sorting, and cleaning up like always. I was finishing up something in the back room of the store when I heard the front door chime go off. We were closed, so I initially thought that it was just my coworker coming back from getting food before the Chinese place closed. But when I walked up to the front, I froze. Standing in the middle of the store was none other than Santa Claus. Something about him was off. He looked a bit haggard, kind of wired and wily, like he couldn't quite focus on anything in particular. Worse yet, his beard was half undone and just sort of hanging there. "Can I help you?" I managed to stammer out, thinking that he had to have a reason to be there, right? At first, he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me wide-eyed like he didn't expect me to actually speak to him. Then, in a raspy and almost desperate voice, he said, You know they're not real. They're not real. None of this is real." I wasn't really sure what to say to that. Was this some kind of joke or something? His eyes told me that it wasn't. He looked genuinely disturbed. Haunted, even. I just sort of nodded at him and said, "Sir, I think you should go ahead and leave." Instead of leaving, he took a huge step forward, causing me to quickly step back and behind the counter. He then continued on with, "You don't get it. They're watching us. All the time. Watching." At this point, I was genuinely scared. I grabbed the phone and hit the button for security. But the second that I did, Santa turned tail and ran out of the store. I mean, full-on sprinted out of the store. I quickly walked over to the door and pulled it shut and locked it, while I was also explaining to the security guard what had happened. The guard showed up and asked me a few more questions. then mentioned that my store wasn't actually the only one that this guy had been acting strange at. Apparently, he'd actually gone off on the cashier at Spencer's, like verbally assaulted him about the same things that he was saying to me. The next day, the Santa station was closed, and he was seemingly gone. There were some rumors about how Santa had a breakdown, how he was on drugs, and there were even talks about the possibility of him having been a mentally ill homeless man that somehow landed the job. I have no idea. I never learned the truth about him, and based on the conversation we'd had, it could have been any of it. Worse yet, about a week or two later, I actually saw the man again. It was well after close. I was walking out to my car, and I saw him standing in the parking garage, still wearing the Santa outfit. 2 weeks later. He was just walking around the parking garage aimlessly, kind of stumbling about and mumbling to himself. I did end up calling the security guard whose cell phone number I had, and he said that he would check it out, but I never got a follow-up. In the end, this was just more ammo for me to dislike mall Santas, for me to be afraid of them, honestly. I didn't see him again after that. The mall hired another person to fill in, and life went back to normal, thankfully. I'm not really sure how to end this story after that. I guess I'll just say that it was obviously creepy, and I'm kind of glad that he took off, because he kind of looked like he was going to do something much more violent. I wanted to share a story that happened to me back in 2019. I used to work in a large toy store located at our mall. I actually loved the place. It wasn't your typical children's store with Barbies and stuffed animals. It had anything you could think of related to toys or hobbies, including puzzles, craft supplies, games, and much more that I can't think of. I had shopped there on many occasions because it was closer than some of the other local retail stores and had better variety. I started working there when I was 18, shortly before I graduated. The perks were pretty well worth it, even having to deal with the angry moms. But the mall also attracted some odd people, which is why I'm telling you this story. So, the mall I'm at is pretty long, but it has 2 floors, and my store was on the bottom floor and close to the middle. We also tend to see and hear a lot of the activity outside of the store, because we're close to the carousel that's in there as well, right by the ice cream kiosk. And so there's typically a lot of activity around us. And while we did have the occasional mean customer walking through the door, we didn't often get people that were so disruptive that we would have to kick them out. But then walks in a man that I will call Happy. I was at the front picking up some toys that had toppled over when this guy walked in, stopped at the entrance and shouted into the store, "It's a wonderful day in the USA!" At first I thought the guy was pretty eccentric, so I looked over at him and chuckled and said, "And good afternoon to you." He seemed to appreciate my acknowledgement and walked over to me. When he got closer, I could tell that he was definitely drunk. I could smell the alcohol wafting from him, and I could only assume what the stain on his shirt was from. His eyes looked heavy and his speech was slurred. Yet, he was the happiest drunk that I'd ever encountered. I just hoped that he didn't drive there like that. So, he approached me and asked, "How are you doing, love?" But again, it wasn't in a creepy way, and it was just friendly, so I didn't take offense to it. I told him that I was fine and asked if he was okay, given the circumstances, and he said that he'd never been better. He asked me if I had plans for the holiday, and I said that I did. to which he seemed very pleased with this and began digging in his coat pocket. He then literally pulled out a wad of bills. There was no rhyme or reason to them, and in fact, a few fell to the floor and he didn't even seem to notice. I picked up the bills that fell all while he continued talking to me, and when I tried to hand them back, he held out a $100 bill to me saying, "Take this and have a Merry Christmas, love." I smiled with a slight chuckle, but shook my head, telling him that I couldn't accept it. He made an exaggerated, "Aw, man, I just wanted to do something nice." I told him that I appreciated the thought, and that it was nice, but that I just couldn't accept it per my job. He understood, grabbed the bills from me, and stuffed it all back into his pocket. He then went in for a hug, which I accepted, once again not getting any real weird vibes from him, and he happily walked off down one of the aisles, with a bit of a skip in his step even. However, he still let his presence be known. He practically narrated out loud everything that he was looking at. "Oh, this little guy walks, and roars. Nice, it dances." He wasn't really hurting anything, just being a little louder than the rest of us. My manager started getting annoyed because he would knock stuff down, because he obviously wasn't walking straight. But if he noticed it, he would turn and immediately pick it back up. After a few aisles, my manager had enough of it, while the rest of us thought he was just having a good time and not hurting anybody. She went and confronted the guy, and said that he was causing too much chaos, and that if he didn't make a purchase in the next 5 minutes, then he needed to leave. He turned to her with an exaggerated frown, and from what I could see, tried to offer her some cash too, which she refused. He then made his way back up to the front, waved to all of us, and left. So, we just continued about our day and picked up the items he had dropped and left behind. Everything seemed to go back to normal for probably about half an hour tops, when I started to notice a small crowd forming outside of the store. I didn't think anything of it at first, especially being in a mall. People stop randomly for a break, to reorganize bags. Sometimes they'd even start talking to someone they were with or ran into. But it wasn't until I saw them looking up and pointing that I became curious. When I got the chance to step away, I walked out to the front of the store and looked at where everyone's attention seemed to be, and I figured it out. Happy was on the top level, looking down to the bottom. He was saying or singing something that I couldn't quite make out. But what I could understand were the bills that he seemed to be slowly dropping to the bottom, on purpose. People were standing around trying to grab them as they slowly fell, or playfully fighting as they picked them up off the floor. While everyone seemed to be having a good time with it, including Happy, something was giving me a bad feeling. I was going to head back in and ask my manager if there was something that we should do, but the screaming from the people were becoming louder, making me think something was happening. I turned back to the crowd and saw that Happy was now crawling onto the railing and sitting on it, with his feet now dangling over the edge. I immediately became nervous about this, knowing that it was not going to end well. What if people got out of control down by us because of the money? What if someone above noticed this and starts fighting with Happy, causing him to fall? I yelled back into my store and told someone to call security, but quickly went back outside to watch what would happen. I tried to get people to keep walking and not huddle, saying that it was a safety issue to block a store's entrance, which wasn't entirely false, but no one would budge. They all stood where they were, waiting for more money to drop. Not long after, I saw 2 security guards approaching. I pointed to Happy and tried to quickly explain. but one guard was already running towards the stairs while the other one stood nearby, ordering people to leave, which finally worked. But then the feeling of dread that was approaching finally hit its climax, as Happy yelled something about love. I couldn't quite tell what he said, held his arms out wide, closed his eyes and leaned forward until he fell off the railing. It all seemed to go in slow motion, yet I was frozen in fear, not knowing what to do. I watched him fall to the ground as he hit a bench directly below. The sickening thud echoed through the mall, and he flopped off the bench onto the ground, motionless. I stood there as I took in everything around me. Some people still nearby were screaming, trying to snap photos and looking for more loose bills. The security guards were calling for an ambulance as they were trying to care for Happy, who was now unresponsive and lying in a pool of blood around his head. More people from my store and the one across the way came out and were watching too. I was terrified, nearly holding my breath just thinking that I watched this man fall to his death, and that I was no better than the rest of the people that stood by to watch. Thankfully, the EMTs showed up, and as they put him in the head and neck brace, he groaned, at least telling me he was still alive. The aftermath became kind of a blur. One of the janitors came by to clean up the blood, which was a decent amount. People slowly dispersed, and we were told to continue working, with that image now burned into my head. I was thinking about it the rest of the night. Where did Happy come from since he was so obviously intoxicated? Why did he have so much cash on him? And why was he so willing to just give it out? Most importantly, why did he fall? It was obviously intentional, but none of it made sense. I never saw the guy again, so I also don't know what happened, but it's still fresh in my mind, especially around this time of year. I just hope that he turned out alright, and that I never have to experience something like that ever again. It's that wonderful time of year again, so I want to share a story of something that happened to me several years ago. I try to share this frequently as a warning to not only women, but anyone that could be vulnerable in this situation. Some may take this story as entertainment, and I'm okay with that too. But I just hope that that means that they will remember it and be able to avoid something like this. So, here it goes. This was back in the winter of 2017, the end of November. I'm a very social and outgoing person, so when the holidays roll around, I'm always planning parties for my family, both sides. A party that my boyfriend and I would host for some of his family, as well as some parties with friends. I also love the gifting side of it. I love seeing people's reactions when they open a gift that I got them. So, every year, I try to make or get the perfect gift for everyone. This year I knew specifically what I wanted to get my sister, but unfortunately, it was a bit pricey. So, I'd been going to a few different places looking for the best price. I had even braved the Black Friday sales but had no luck. So, late one night, I wound up at a department store to pick up a gift for someone else, as well as some more wrapping paper. I also tried to get my shopping done and prepped as early as possible, so that I'm not running around last minute. It was late one night, and with no work the next day, I started by just casually roaming the aisles to see if there was anything else I wanted. I was looking at shoes when I saw an associate at the end of the aisle. I could tell that he worked there, because while he was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, he had his name badge hanging out of his pocket. So my thought was, he was probably AP. That's asset protection for those of you who don't know. I understand the purpose of the job, especially with the holiday season, but sometimes the associates take it too far, or they think they're so good at it that they're terrible at it, if that makes sense. And so, anyways, I spotted him looking at something on the end cap and continued doing what I was doing. But when I started trying on a pair of shoes, I texted my sister-in-law to get her shoe size, thinking that she would like the ones I was looking at. While waiting for her response, I felt that familiar sensation of being watched, and looked up at this guy, and of course, he went from looking at me to quickly looking back down at the fuzzy socks. So I rolled my eyes with a soft laugh, grabbed the shoes, and walked away. I walked around the store a little longer, but of course, Mr. AP was there every step of the way. I kept finding him at the end of the aisles, seemingly busy, but obviously watching me. It was late, I was tired, and was already kind of annoyed with being followed, so I just decided to go and grab the item I came for so I could leave. However, as I made my way to my destination in that store, I was shocked to see the item I had been looking at for my sister, and it seemed to be about $15 cheaper. Even crazier in my opinion were that there were no sales tags on it. It was like this was the normal price, so I knew that I had to get it. The only thing preventing me from taking it up to the checkout counter was the anti-theft mechanism holding it on the shelf. So I had to find someone to help. I walked over to a nearby aisle but didn't see anybody, but I also didn't want to go far, calling dibs on the item on the shelf. Finally, I did spot an associate, but it was the AP guy. So, why not ask him for help, I guess, as well as get the satisfaction of calling him out to say, hey, yes, I see you and you're not sneaky. However, I called out to him saying, excuse me, sir, you work here, right? He did a double take at me, but then, without saying anything, he walked away with his head down. Now, I was no longer annoyed. I was pretty angry. I understand that AP is supposed to look undercover in a sense, but he obviously was not doing a good job. So, why not ask for help? He could have at least said, I'll go get someone for you, or something like that. Instead, he just ignored me. I finally just gave up and started heading to the front of the store to leave, but I still wanted to share my experience with someone. So, once I got there, I told the cashier that I needed help with an item, and that the one associate that I saw ignored me, and also mentioned that I was pretty sure it was their AP guy too. The cashier looked at me curiously and said that they would let management know, and even called for someone to get the item for me. Once I got my item, I paid for it all and started heading to the door, receipt in hand, preparing to be stopped one last time. To my surprise, though, I didn't see him at the door. But then my relief was quickly stomped out when I saw him standing by the bench outside the doors. Now, I was pretty pissed off. I waved my receipt in the air in his direction and said in an annoyed tone, "It's all paid for, you can leave me alone now." But he then answered that with an obvious smile in his voice and said, "You sure about that?" At that point, I instantly went from annoyed to scared. It was something about the way he said that instantly creeped me out. I continued walking to my car, but now backwards, not wanting to turn my back to this guy. I had my keys in my right hand, but I was now adjusting them to go in between my knuckles as I walked. And when I got to my car, there was a truck in front of me, so once I got to the door, I wouldn't be able to see him. I quickly jumped in, holding my 2 bags and my purse, trying to quickly move them out of the way so that I could lock my doors. Once locked, I looked around to see if the guy followed me, but he was nowhere in sight. After I calmed down, I told myself that I needed to report this to the store because this was never acceptable. If he really thought I was stealing something, he should have stopped me at the door, not followed me to my car. So, I called the store and I asked for a manager. As I explained to them what I had experienced, the woman asked me if I was still there, and I said that I was in my car. She asked if I would come back into the store to give them an official statement that they could file, and ask me a few more questions. I told her that I would be willing to, but that I also was not willing to get out of my car alone. So, she actually walked out to my car, and as we both walked in together, we looked around and did not see this guy. I went into the manager's office with her, and there was another male manager already in there. She had explained further about what all happened. I left the bags in the car, but had my purse, keys, receipt, and phone with me. She didn't even seem remotely concerned that I was stealing and asked me for a description of the guy. After I described him, she looked over at the other manager who made a face and shrugged. She then turned back to me and said that she was concerned because they didn't have anyone, AP or otherwise, working that night that matched the description. Yeah, cue me really panicking now. She even had their guy in AP come out, and I confirmed that it was not him. He'd actually been in the security room watching the cameras while I was there. Thankfully, they had the same idea that I did. They had me review a portion of the camera footage to point the guy out, and suggested that we file a police report because of what he was doing. It was my choice, since all they could really report was a suspicious person. But if they were willing to, then so was I. We waited for the police to show up, and once more explained what happened. Their real AP couldn't find him anywhere in the store, and couldn't find him outside, so they all assumed that he'd probably left, or at least walked to somewhere where the cameras couldn't find him. I, of course, was not feeling too good about going home alone now, so one of the officers was kind enough to walk me to my car and followed me home. He then said that they would drive around the area a few times before leaving. Thankfully, this all made me feel better about the situation, and that maybe this guy was just a creep whose plans were foiled. Or maybe he was even just screwing around and playing a very unfunny prank. Either way, I was glad it was over. Or, at least, I thought it was over. I went to bed just fine. After calling my boyfriend and telling him what happened, and even the next morning, I had pretty much put it in the back of my mind. But later that morning, after I had breakfast and a shower, I had to run some errands. I went out to my car and I was unlocking it, and I noticed a shape on my window. After looking at it from different angles because of the glare, I was able to confirm what I was seeing. There was an obvious cupped palm print on the glass, like somebody was looking into my car. I know that it wasn't there the previous day. It was pretty obvious as the handprint seemed to be oily or something, and it left a residue, which is why I noticed it and would have if it was there the day prior. All the bad feelings from the day prior came rushing back, and I ran inside and called my boyfriend. He told me to make a report with the police, which I did. Unfortunately, because I couldn't prove that it was related to the incident, or that I even knew who this person was, they couldn't really do much. So, I was left feeling vulnerable, helpless, and not to mention possibly watched or stalked. I ended up staying home that day, ordered cameras online, and waited till my boyfriend got off work to take me to the places I needed to go. I can report that I have not seen that guy since, thankfully, nor have I experienced anything similar to it. I don't know what his intentions were, but I do hope that he was just screwing around, and that I can call him a jerk. But it really did freak me out, and I was kind of afraid to go places alone for at least a few months. I've seen posts and horror stories about women being followed, and things being done to their cars to try and trick or distract them, and that caused quite a bit of fear in me. What if that was his goal? What if the print was a distraction? Or maybe just him making sure that he had the right car? It still freaks me out, but I try to put it to rest by instead thinking of all the right things that I did. I'm proud of myself for calling the store. I'm proud of myself for filing the police report for them, and even calling the cops the following morning, even if they said they couldn't do anything. And I'm proud that I didn't just ignore it, and that I kept myself safe. Today, I carry pepper spray and continue to keep an eye out for people around me. So, I guess, bottom line, don't ever think you're paranoid if you experience something unsettling, or something or someone makes you feel unsafe. Report it. Worst case scenario is that it's nothing, and you can put your fears to rest. Stay safe out there, folks. So that, my friends, was a collection of some terrifying retail stories. Stories that happen in retail settings that are scary. Yes. From people drunkenly falling from the second floor of a mall, to a creepy mall Santa, to an AP stalker that wasn't actually part of AP, but probably had malicious intentions. These were definitely some scary stories. And hopefully, you all enjoyed them. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing. And if you feel so bold, you can leave me a comment down below letting me know your thoughts. Join Patreon or membership for early access to content like this, or do a super thanks, which is a tip to the channel. Now, you may notice I rushed through that to some extent, and for that I apologize, but I felt it was for the best to do so that I could talk to you all for at least a minute or two and tell y'all what's been going on with Raven. November was a challenging month. Trying, even. It tried my patience, for sure. As you all know, the month began very painfully with the Tyler being diagnosed with anemia, and then just progressively got worse to the point where we ended up having to euthanize Tyler, and that was heartbreaking for the entire week after. Still is very heartbreaking, but I kind of just couldn't work for a little bit after that. And then I get back to work, and the holidays start to come around, Thanksgiving particularly. I come to a decision that I'm going to go ahead and spend the holidays with part of my family. A small group, larger than most groups that we usually do, but not terrifyingly large, at 11 people. Myself, patients, my dad, aunt, uncle, cousin, his wife, his son, his other son, my second cousin, and then her boyfriend later on in the night. So, apparently socializing and familial dinners was the wrong decision this year, and now I'm sick. Now, at first, I posted about how I was sick, and I didn't know what the hell it was, because the COVID test was negative. Well, a couple days later, let me tell you that COVID test was definitely positive, which is kind of similar to how it happened last time. It was, actually, I was positive, for no patients was, I was negative, whatever. The point is, there was a delay in getting the information. I now know that what I have, or still have, is COVID again. You may recall this happened last year, in October. That was a freak incident. I don't know how, we went out for dinner one night, because it was like, hey, or lunch, sorry, because she was off, and I was like, let's get food, and then we got sick, because I'm an idiot and chose to do that. This year, it was the family dinner at Thanksgiving, so I believe that Raven is done socializing. I don't think I'm going to be doing any family gatherings anytime in the next year or two. I'm just kind of done with it. I don't want this again. Thankfully, this time it has not been as bad as last year. Last year was hell, the entire week. This year, it was 24 hours of hell, and then it's been 7 days of this BS since, so I'm on the mend. I still sound like ass, but I'm on the mend, so there's that. Got my lemon myrtle tea right here, if that helps you guys not tell me to drink more tea. because that seems to be the response every time I say I'm sick, is to drink tea. Lemon myrtle tea's pretty good. So, there's that. I'm done yapping. I'm also done with November. Screw November of 2023. December of 2023 is going to start off rough with me sounding like this, but it's going to be a good month. Can you guys tell me it's going to be a good month in the comments, please? Remind me that resilience is the theme of 2023, because I've been trying to be resilient, and it's been kind of rough. But I know with all the love and support of you amazing people, we'll get through it. All that said, friends, remember you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And if you face challenges this time of year, as some people do, remember that you are stronger than any adversity that you may face. And by the end of it, you will be even stronger than what you were prior to facing said adversity. Yeah. And of course, much love. Sleep well.